Little known fact, Recycled Minds Comedy was established in 2002 and it's evolved from a local improv comedy troupe into an internationally in-demand team. They've left audiences in stitches around the world performing at prestigious events like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, the world's largest performance arts festival, on cruise ships and at top-notch universities, and even for Fortune 500 companies. Recycled Minds guarantees side-splitting interactive performances suitable for all ages. But here's the twist. Recycled Minds isn't just about making you laugh. They're here to help you build self-confidence, enhance communication, and boost teamwork through their top-notch improv classes and corporate training programs. So whether you're a corporate team seeking to level up or just searching for a night of uncontrollable laughter, because we need that, head over to recycledmindscomedy.com because the world is in need of more humor and humanity. recycledmindscomedy.com. Welcome to Off the Cuff. In this episode, we talk about something we have not yet covered here. What you're about to hear is an authentic and impactful conversation with Ashley Sears, a dynamic speaker, podcaster, and founder of Stories Unveiled. Ashley's innate ability to cut through the small talk and take us on a journey to explore the stories that shape us and reveal the spaces where we need healing. In the midst of a challenging season in her marriage, Ashley and her husband are confronted with vulnerability head-on, shattering the Christian mask that had been worn for years. This episode is a roller coaster of emotions from laughter to tears. Spoiler alert, someone might just shed a tear, and that may or may not be me. So get ready for a raw and real conversation as Ashley unveils the power of freedom that comes with embracing our imperfections. Sensitive ears may be required as we go off the cuff. Ashley, thank you for being on the podcast, the show with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to dive into it. One, your podcast is very powerful, and I feel like the things that you cover and talk about are pertinent for couples. They're pertinent for individuals who are going through life stuff and how the world just kind of reveals things to us. So in your podcast and your organization that you run is Stories Unveiled.
Right.
And the power of story, I think, is something that all of us can resonate with. Mm-hmm. So thanks for doing the work that you've done and the hard work that you've done and where it's brought you and the person that you are because of the journey.
Yeah.
So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my honor. I love it.
Cool. Would you mind sharing a little bit of like where you started in this process, where this all kind of began for you?
Yeah. So it started about 7 years ago, we'll say in 2018. In 2018 is when this started. My husband and I had just come out of a pretty rough season. We just celebrated 18 years of marriage. But about a year and a half into our marriage, I found out that my husband had a pornography and sex addiction. So that was fun.
Yeah, party, I'm sure.
Our daughter was like 18 months.
Okay.
And I really was super naive in thinking that like if he just figured out his junk, we'd be good, we'd be fine. So that's what I told him, figure it out. And he said he would. Well, 10 to 12 years of like an addiction roller coaster is really what that was. In 2017, we found a group called Pure Desire Ministries, and my husband started going to groups. We started kind of getting connected, and that was the first time, and I'm like doing a big leap here because we did counseling, and there were so many things.
A lot of in between.
Many things in the 10 to 12 years. But Pure Desire is what really started to change things. He started seeking healing and recovery and sobriety, what we call it, sobriety from, looking at all the things, acting out, doing all of those things. And we kind of started to rebuild our marriage in that. I started finding healing from myself as far as the betrayed spouse and some of the trauma that I had gone through, not just married to him, but even as a child. And we realized that when we decided to start being open and honest with people and sharing our story, every single person that we shared with, whether it was in a couple situation or just individually on our own, they all had something too.
Right.
Some of it was pornography, some of it was infidelity, some of it was kind of in that realm, but not all of it.
Right.
I mean, people had things that they had never told a soul. Some of them had things that they were just carrying that they just couldn't work through. I mean, the phrase "everyone's got a story" or "everyone's got, junk" was never more real. And I was really bothered by it. So I prayed. I was like, Lord, what do I do with this? I know I can't do, can't help people, but I was just really, I had this like holy discontent for the fact that we show up to church. I was leading full-time ministry at the time. We show up to church, we put on our Sunday best, whether it's our clothes or our facade.
Right.
And we pretend like everything's fine, even though I was literally just chewing my kids out on the way to church, or I'm yelling at my husband. Yeah, or mad at my husband or whatever. Right. And I hated that. I've always had this passion to just be real and to draw real out in people. And so I asked the Lord what to do, and he said, give women a platform. And so I approached 6 of my closest friends at the time, whose stories I knew for the most part, and asked if they would be willing to share in front of hundreds of women. If they'd be willing to share their story.
Wow.
And some of them said no, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But most of them said yes.
Wow.
And the church that I was working at the time, they just opened up their auditorium and said, you can do this. And so 200 women packed the auditorium, and we didn't have any extra seats. And we just had a day full of worship music and testimonies, really. But there was a point to it. It wasn't just, I'm going to share my story or just how they found Jesus. It was, share a time in your life or share a journey in your life where you have watched God show up. And even if you're in the midst of it still, that he's still working and where you can see it to offer hope at the end of every story. Not the end. We're not at the end. Right. But through it.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And I've been doing those events every year now since 2018. Yeah. And now I have a podcast.
Wild. So you went from sharing the story, and then as you share, you're realizing people are coming to you and sharing and opening up to you.
Totally.
Where they're like, I get it, same here, kind of a thing. And then you're frustrated with that, and you're like, okay, I want to be real, I want to be authentic, and I want to share stories. And so God tells you, give women a platform to share their stories. Would you say, what I'm feeling like I'm hearing is that by sharing these stories, it's bringing healing to other people, and they're realizing they're not alone. Yeah. There's actually other people just like them who have a very similar story, who've had similar hurt, similar heartbreak, and there's a way through. Yeah. There's a good, healthy way to get through the other side versus like, dude, sucks for you.
Totally.
Right?
Well, so I heard it actually before I started Stories Unveiled. I was leading a Bible study in my home, and there was probably 8 women, and everybody left. It was over. And the last woman that was there, she was putting on her shoes on my stairs. And she was kind of an older lady. And she was sitting there, and I had just shared, because I am just kind of wired to just be real. Like sometimes I'm too much, but like I don't like to candy coat things in small talk. I'm just not good at small talk. And so I had just shared, introducing myself, because some of the ladies didn't know me, who I was, what I was about, why I was passionate about leading the type of Bible study I was leading, which was really about just getting vulnerable and like being real, like in light of the gospel. And so, after it was all over, she was putting her shoes on my stairs, and she kind of stops and she looks at me and she says, I would have had no clue had you not shared that. She said, because I got to be really honest with you. She said, I see you every Sunday, and you're standing in the lobby of the church, and you're always so put together, and your husband's really handsome, and your children are just beautiful. And, she said all these things, not me. But she's saying all these very kind things about what she thinks my life looks like. She said, I pulled up to your house, and you have a cute little suburban house just short of the picket fence, right? And she said, and I had an opinion about you, about who you were and what you represented. And I came because this is the only day that the Bible study worked for me.
Wow.
And she was being really real and being really honest. And she said, but then you shared your heart and you shared really struggles and you shared like who you were. She said, and I immediately felt terrible and it softened me. And like you're human like me, like you don't have it all together. Like I 100% don't have it all together. I've got junk. Wow. And so it was one of those things where it was like, man, if we could just create a culture, definitely inside the church. I think that outside the church, people can actually do this very well. I feel like I have ran into the most resistance in the church. It's my experience.
Yeah.
But if the church definitely could create this culture of it's okay to not be okay, because we have God. Like we don't have to have it all together because we know somebody who does.
Right. Would you say that is because there's this pressure, especially maybe from people on staff, where if you're leading or serving people, that you should have it all together? Or does that make sense? Like
totally.
There's at least, it seems like that connotation, right?
Yeah, so leading in women's ministry as the women's director on full-time staff for 7 years. Yes, and I also can understand there is a level of professionalism that you need to have. You know, when I'm greeting in the lobby, or when I'm counseling women, or when I'm whatever working doing ministry like that, I have to be stable. I have to there's a level of professionalism. But I also need to be human. And I feel like we all need to be human. And if we meet people with a persona of we have it all together because God, then the people that are like, man, why does my life feel so broken? Why am I struggling? Why can't I do these things? Because I believe in Jesus too, but yet I can't seem to figure it out. I want people to know and have an environment and a place that they feel safe and know that even the people who seem to have it the most together, they just maybe hide it the best. Because we've all got stuff.
Totally, 100%. I recently been running or co-leading a men's group that's going through the spiritual disciplines, and we're currently we're following a book, right? And the section that we're currently going over is confession, which
great.
It's a really fun one, especially when it's your turn to lead.
Yeah, of course. You're like, so I'm going to be gone that week.
Yeah, exactly. There seemed to be a couple of people that were, but yeah, there was. But when it comes to being real, and being honest, and because you want to set that opportunity for other people, and to be able to share from your heart. And to do it in a way where you're speaking from maybe your scars instead of your wounds.
100%.
As I was sharing a story to these guys of like the moment of confession kind of a thing. As I'm sharing this story of when I lived in Los Angeles before I met my wife and was dating this girl, and we weren't married, but we were doing things that married people do, kind of a thing.
Yeah, playing house.
Playing house, really neat.
Really neat. Fun game.
Fun game. I had 3 friends who came up to me, and I was teaching improv at the time. And the improv that I was teaching for was in part like a ministry. And so some people were seeing me essentially as like a person in ministry who was essentially like sleeping with his girlfriend.
You're supposed to be leading people to Jesus and also you're not.
The funny thing is like, I didn't want responsibility. Like I didn't want to be held to that standard of accountability that they were wanting to hold me to. Because I wanted to do what I wanted to do.
Totally.
And I didn't even want to teach. And they're like, yeah, teach a class. And at the end, you say a prayer for people. I was like, really? I have to do that kind of a thing.
Do I have to?
Right. And I used to say I'm not much of a worship guy. Like even for me at the time going to church and like the whole worship thing wasn't I would literally say like, I'm not much of a worship guy.
Like the music?
The music. Okay. What I was realizing, I wasn't much of a Christian.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Snap.
Yeah. So these guys who I was outside of this improv theater, like on Hollywood Boulevard, and they're like, hey, Sean, can we talk to you? And for some reason, after a show, I guess that's where y'all could meet. They end up saying like, hey, we want to talk to you about your relationship and how unhealthy it is, especially for you. People look up to you. You're a leader, and you're not doing. We don't feel like you're doing it right, and so we know you're better than that. That's kind of essentially, and so this was the moment.
That's good.
Yeah, and this was a moment where I instantly had the mirror held up to me.
Totally.
And I had two different feelings going on in my mind. One was defensive. One was, how dare you?
Yeah.
I'm my own man. I can make my own choices, right? I can do what I want. And then the other was the total opposite.
Yeah.
The other was, wow, how great of friends do you have that would reveal to you how much better of a person you actually are. Because if you really believe some of these things that you say you believe, your life would look differently.
Yeah.
And so it was a tough pill to swallow at the time, but what it ended up producing in my life was health and healing and freedom and restoration. And it ended up setting my life on a trajectory that changed it forever. Because of these friends who confronted me about a sin. And I wouldn't recommend you just like going up to people and be like, hey dude, you're in this sin, I want to call it out. Yeah, obviously,
you have to have a
relationship and you have to have that permission with them where they're even like, hey, can we talk to you about something?
Yeah.
This is going to be difficult. And it's about ... And just like let that land and seeing how that's going, because it's tough. So I don't mean to go on and off about this, but I guess the point that I'm trying to say is the power of revealing difficult things open you up for a world of healing and honesty and giving you that chance to be this guy or this gal or this, you know what I mean, to be this person or the person that you're purposed to be, the person that someone would die for you to be.
Yeah.
So,
and just to add to that, I've been a part of a lot of recovery groups. I've been in a lot of Bible studies. I've been in a lot of situations, where there's small groups, right, in the church. And in the church, out of the church, it doesn't matter. I think that there is a tendency to focus on the train wreck, right? Like it's like the train wreck mentality, right? Or a car accident, you drive by real slow to to see like all the, all the stuff. It's like in most people, there's like this innate desire for somebody to spill the tea, right? To like know all the juicy gossip, even if it's but even if it's your own life, and you want to share it, like. I believe not everybody deserves, full transparency for every little thing in your life. Like that's reserved for people that you have relationship with. Yeah. The details, you know. It's okay to be honest, but you can be honest without details. But I believe that's why for Stories Unveiled, it's so important that women do share their stories and they do have to kind of share the ugly. Yeah. But that's not what we focus on. We don't focus on we don't go on and on about the pornography. We don't go on and on about the drug addiction or the suicide attempt or whatever it is, because we've had all of those things on the stage. We talk about it because it needs to be talked about. It needs to be addressed in a very clear manner. Yeah. But we move on from there because God pulls us out of that. Yeah. Like we're not camping there.
That's so good. And in part because, especially with spouses, that spouse, like, depending on how you tell a story or how you highlight the story, that person is either the villain or they're the victim or they're the victor. And I think that's where a healthy relationship can reveal, like, and I think throughout our lives, we appear in our story as like, dude, that's where I was the villain, or you know, that this is where my wife came alongside me, and this is where I became or I revealed like I had a bad history where I didn't know I was, and then now you get to walk as the victor, and I think that's I think to your point, right, where you don't get hung up on the train wreck, but you reveal like these are the bumps and bruises that we went through. So now your audience is like, oh, I get that. I feel for them. Totally. I relate with them, and they've teleported me into their story. Now I get it. And then now here's the hope.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the point of these stories, right? Is to lead people into hope and wholeness, right? Into healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. That's so powerful. Can you share a moment where you feel like you had everything figured out and then something popped up and you're like, oh, this changes things?
Yeah. So kind of going back to when I found out about my husband's pornography addiction, and I had mentioned that I really thought that he just needed to be done and then we would be good, we would be done. And we went through this really long journey. Well, when we finally got to the point of my husband is in a support group, counseling, he has accountability, and not just me nagging him, he has his own men accountability. He's asked me to put on all the accountability software. He's removed all the social media, and he's done all of this on his own. And I can see actual behavior change, that he's starting to actually get the healing that I said he needed, years and years ago. I legitimately thought that we were going to be okay. Great. He's fixing the problem, so we are going to be fine. Our marriage can be whole again, all of the things. Much to my surprise, about 6 months into his healing journey, doing amazing. Like there's so many ways I knew that he was doing well. I was still real mad. I was still really angry and bitter and did not trust him, and rightfully so. But I really was so blindsided by the fact that I needed counseling. And now I needed to deal with my stuff. And I was not ready for the level of commitment, because this whole time it was like, this is your problem. Right. This is not my problem. But it became my problem because I stayed, because I decided I wanted to be with my husband, and my husband decided to put in the work to save our marriage. And once we did that and we committed to each other, I was not prepared for the healing that I needed to go through, separate from him, on my own, to really make our marriage okay and to work on our marriage. Because, I was convinced, like, once he gets this, we'll be fine. And he did, and we were not fine. But it was because of me now. Right.
So now you realize, like, oh, I've got some things I got to deal with, from bitterness to hurt. Almost, maybe this is like almost like a form of grieving, where there's the steps you have to go through it in order to get on the other side of it, right? Because when you're married, you're the two become one, right?
Yeah.
So it's like having a part of you that you are healing.
Yeah.
So what happened? Like, this is something you were like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So I started a group, and I got support, and I worked through a book that's specific for spouses.
Okay, cool.
And kind of went on this healing journey too. For me, it was also more than just my husband's addiction, me working through. I mean, there is betrayal that comes from that. There's trauma that comes from all of the disclosures and all of the times you're lied to and all the times you find out. And there's this emotional kind of trauma that happens in that. But also, I brought a lot of baggage to my marriage. My husband did too. He's divorced and had a child and all of those things. But I had been assaulted. I had testified and sent somebody to prison, like in the month that I met my husband, that was stalking me. Yeah. And I have childhood like stuff. And so, you think you kind of deal with it, but really what I've always done my whole life, I've refused to be a victim my whole life. So because of that, I think I completely do like, a 180 in the respect of, I'm not going to let it define me. I'm not going to be a victim. And so I push it. So I just push it away. And so I know that that's kind of what I've done with a lot of things. So it all kind of hit a point when my marriage, got to the point where I could blame my husband for our marriage falling apart. But when my husband started to get healing and started to be healthy, I couldn't blame him anymore for our marriage falling apart. I had to look in the mirror. You talked about looking in the mirror.
Sure.
And nobody called me out on it. As a matter of fact, my husband didn't either, because it seemed really understandable why I still felt the way that I did.
Yeah.
But for me, I knew, like, man, I'm just going to keep going down this road. And, in healing, he's doing this, if this is God, right? And we're working toward that in marriage. He's doing this in his journey of healing and recovery, but I'm still doing this, and I'm not drawing any closer to God. I'm not drawing any closer to my husband because I'm still mad and I have righteous anger, right? But it wasn't. And so I couldn't blame anybody anymore for the marriage problem. So I had to start doing my own work.
Awareness is huge. Like the fact that you were able to identify, oh, wow, this is a problem that I have, or that I can now do something about it. If you're not aware, you can't do anything about it.
Right.
And I've seen relationships where the wife has forgiven the husband, but when something else pops up, she'll bring that back up.
Yeah.
And so it'll bring him back into that
shame cycle.
The shame cycle. Thank you. And it's almost like she always has this thing over him, and so he can't ever grow past that.
No.
Versus the idea of like forgiving, forgetting, moving on. Of course, like it's one thing to forgive, forget, and move on. It's another thing to continue to get walked on. That's not what I'm talking about here.
And like for me, and even my husband, like I don't forget, but we've talked about it. So it's instead of, when you have maybe some mistrust or you're struggling as the spouse and you hang it over their head, there is no freedom in that. He can never get free of that. He'll constantly live in the shame as long as we consistently put him there.
Right.
But it is okay, in my opinion, and what my husband and I have done, when I have moments of, I don't know if I trust him, or I'm really struggling with this, or I think maybe he's doing X, Y, and Z, for me to ask him, and if, trust that his no means no and his yes means yes, and trust what he's telling me. Obviously, there has to be some history there of trust built.
Right.
And then have open conversations about it. And I feel this way because of your behavior, because of the things that you're doing or saying or whatever, and having open communication that way. And that's something that my husband has given me permission to do because of his health and because he's gotten to a place of being able to hear it and receive it. But I don't ever hang it over his head, or when we're in a fight, say, oh yeah, well, whatever, fill in the blank, and throw back things that he's done in the past, because I want to leave the past in the past. It doesn't mean forgetting for us, but it does mean we don't need to live there. It's just like with Stories Unveiled, we're not camping in the mess. We don't want to stay there. We want to move past it. That's where freedom is.
Right. That's right. Acknowledge this is what happened.
Yeah.
This is all the hurt that happened here, and let's find the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. That's fantastic. I'd like to leave a link in the description where people can find your podcast, and also maybe this is striking a chord for people who are like, dude, that's speaking to me, and they want to find some help. We'll leave a link in the description as well for that too.
Awesome. Life
itself can be risky.
Yeah.
Right? So there's people that I know that are watching this right now that they are in the trenches. Like they're dealing with exactly what you dealt with 10 years ago, or maybe they're dealing with what you 10 years later. They're in it, they're discovering, it's resurfacing, there's relapse, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What would you say to a wife or a husband that like they're in it right now and they're willing to work through it?
Being willing to work through it. That's a big deal. If you're committed to working through it, though, I would say you have to put Jesus at the center of your marriage. You have to, because without walking with the Lord, there's no way my husband and I would have ever survived. We had literally everything against us. I brought a bunch of baggage to our marriage. He brought a bunch of baggage, an ex-wife, a child, a pornography addiction that I was unaware of. We just had so many things. And then you layer that on with, I was raised in the church, I was raised a believer, and I walked away at 18, when I graduated from high school and I went to college, I walked away from the Lord, which is when I met my husband. He has no faith background whatsoever. Didn't know Jesus. The only time he went to church was when his ex-wife dragged him there because their marriage was falling apart. And he just sat in the church, I don't want to say unaffected, but he didn't know God. And he knew God and religion as a punishment in that moment.
Wow. Yeah.
And so when I met him, I was not going to church. I was not walking any life of faith. There was
there was no
fruit.
flirt to convert.
No, none whatsoever, not at all. But my parents were very faithful, and when they found out, because I moved in with him, we were playing house. We were doing all the things that we should not be doing.
Yeah.
And my parents were on their knees every day just praying. And so we got married. We got pregnant first. Then we got married. Me not walking, him not a believer, and he ended up coming to know Jesus very early on through a series of conversations, and that's his story to tell. But early on in our marriage, I would say 6 months into our marriage, he became a believer, got baptized, and kind of brought me back to the Lord.
Wow, that's wild. It
is wild, and it's amazing, and it's how we kind of built the foundation, obviously, of our family. You know, our daughter doesn't remember that because she was like 6 months old, and then the children after her. You know, we've raised our kids in the church and all of that, but, you know, we had so much against us. No Jesus in our marriage, addiction, so many things that's the only thing that we really had to hang on to when our marriage was falling apart. And so that's the first thing that I would say is you've got to have faith that God is bigger than your circumstance.
Yeah.
And that there is freedom on the other side, but you have to be committed, and you have to be committed to each other and to God and to working through that. And I would also say counseling. Therapy is, I strongly believe in therapy.
That's great. For too long, therapy has been like poo-pooed in so many circles. And the thing is, like, we humans, we need each other.
Yeah.
We need to share.
Yeah.
We need to share these stories. For many reasons. One's to get it off our chest, and to also to have someone hear us, and for us to realize we're not crazy.
Yeah, totally.
So
mostly
that. Oh, that's hilarious. So I also you and your husband actually did a podcast together on your show. I'd like to leave the link to the description, or the link to that episode in the description, because it was really great, and you guys were so honest and authentic, and you get to hear both your hearts and honesty in the journey through that. Great podcast. I totally recommend it.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So I often, and this wasn't in here, so forgive me.
That's okay.
You don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
I'm good off the cuff.
Okay.
See what I did there?
I see what you did there. All right. So this is a question that I'd like to leave with you.
Yeah.
If you can see, let's say, your 17, 18-year-old self, and they're on the other side of that camera, and they're at this life journey where they're like, maybe they're about to step away from their faith. Or maybe they're about to go about life in their own way. If there was one word of advice that you might say...
You're going to make me cry. You haven't even finished the question.
What would you say to her?
I would say, keep going. I thought this was supposed to be fun. I'm not supposed to cry.
We laugh first so that we can cry. That's the secret.
I would say keep going. It's so worth it. And life is hard for everybody. Even those that have it easy, right? Easy.
Sure.
Life is hard. And so to just keep going, because it's so worth it. And all of the blessings and amazing things that you have on the other side of the hard will make you appreciate everything that you've gone through.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I heard maybe it's an urban legend that Mr. Rogers carried this thing in his pocket that said, it's really hard not to love someone once you've heard their story.
100%.
And
I believe that.
And it's everyone, like nobody has it all together. And everyone's going through something. We just don't know it because we also do a good job of just putting on a smile.
Totally.
Right? And putting on a face. So, so here is to us being people that can be confident in our own authentic smile and our stories and being able to share them more, to unveil these stories that we carry within us so that we can bring healing to ourselves and to our hearers. So, Ashley, thank you so much for being on this episode of Off the Cuff.
Absolutely.
And we'll leave all the things, the description and the link, so you can get more in touch with Ashley, her podcast, Stories Unveiled, and take a look at some more of your episodes.
Thanks.
So, yeah. Thanks so much for being here.